What's the worst thing you've ever witnessed at a wedding? Story 1. I was an event manager at a mansion that hosted a lot of weddings, so I've seen my fair share of wedding shit shows. My favorite was probably the one where the entire wedding party started drinking at noon for a 6 p.m. wedding. The groom passed out around 5, and we couldn't get him up. So I made him a ham sandwich and propped him up in bed while I hand-fed him. I managed to get him and his groomsmen down to the courtyard, then had to run back inside and herd the women down. The bride spilled her mimosa all over her dress. 2 of the bridesmaids couldn't find their shoes, but everyone was super happy and nice. There were about 150 people at the reception, and every single one of them got absolutely hammered. The mother of the bride kept sneaking up on me and hugging me, and the groom made me pose for some photos with them. They also gave me all the leftover wedding cake and a few bottles of wine. I miss them. Story 2. One of my best friend's weddings. The groom got so drunk that he completely disappeared from the reception. Things got really awkward when the wedding was supposed to be over. The venue was kicking us out, and the bride and groom were supposed to take off in their vintage car and drive to their honeymoon suite. The music stopped, the lights came on, and it turned into a full-on guest search for the missing groom. My husband finally found him in the parking lot, basically face down on the pavement. He helped him back into the venue, which turned into the most awkward walk of shame past the bride's glaring dad and grandfather. The groom was too drunk to drive, so the bride's grandfather ended up driving them to the hotel suite, about a 30-minute drive. My friend, the bride, later told me that when they got to the room, her new husband passed out cold on the bed, and she had to wander the halls in her wedding dress looking for someone to help unhook it so she could get out of it. Story 3. There was this guy outside the hotel walking up to groups of people in the smoking area, asking how much each person weighed. He was very overweight himself, and it looked like his jeans were on inside out. He was severely underdressed for the occasion, and no one seemed to know who he was. Anyway, he would ask someone's weight and then exclaim, "I can bench that." That went on until one guy, who I think was a family member of the bride, got into an argument with him and started asking around if anyone actually knew this person, figuring he was a wedding crasher. That's when this guy decided to cut a deal with everyone. "If I can pick up that bench with my bare hands, can I stay for the party?" Everyone agreed, since the bench was clearly bolted to the ground. So he walks over, puts his hands on the bench, crouches down, and with all his might, shits his pants in front of everyone. He stood up and waddled off through the parking lot, never to be seen again. I did hear people later that night talking about a guy outside who was on shrooms trying to lift a bench, so I guess he was also tripping balls. Story 4. Unfortunately, it was my wedding, and my best friend of 20 years made it a night I'll never forget, for all the wrong reasons. It started about 6 months before the big day when I asked her to be my maid of honor. Her first response was, "Well, what do you expect of me? You know I'm always really busy with work and my boyfriend from hell." I told her she just needed to stand with me and help keep me calm. A few weeks later, I asked her about getting a dress. She said she didn't have the money, even though I had found one on eBay for $20 including shipping. I told her I'd pay for it, just tell me the size. Radio silence for weeks. I eventually went with plan B and decided to have my sister and daughter stand up with me instead. The big day arrived. Friends and family showed up early to help set up the reception hall. It looked perfect. I called my best friend, who lived an hour away, to ask where she was. She said she had overslept and might be a little late. Great. We went to get our hair done and arrived at the church to get dressed. Just as we were about to walk out and head down the aisle, my best friend came running in, drunk, and with her also drunk boyfriend. Thankfully, my sister and friends managed to steer them to their seats and away from me. The ceremony was beautiful, one of the best moments of my life. Afterward, while we were taking photos outside, her boyfriend came up and asked how soon food would be served at the reception because they were starving. I told him we were finishing up and would be heading over soon. He didn't want to wait and said they were going to get food and more vodka since they had finished their supply on the drive over. Fine. At this point, my patience was wearing thin. We arrived at the reception hall, and it was more magical than I'd imagined. A winter wonderland. Everyone was happy, food was served, and I felt surrounded by love. But not for long. The drunk boyfriend came up to the head table complaining loudly that the fully stocked bar, with bartender and all, wasn't an open bar and how terrible it was that we didn't provide drinks for our guests. People intervened and got him to back off. Peace resumed, for a moment. If you've made it this far, the best, or worst, is yet to come. Dancing began, people were smiling, and then it was time for speeches. My best friend had insisted on giving one, except she was nowhere to be found. Another friend stepped up and saved the day. Still no sign of her or her boyfriend. That's when angry guests started coming inside from the parking lot. Apparently, the boyfriend was outside threatening teens, claiming to be an undercover cop and demanding their drugs. My brothers went out to deal with it. Then things escalated. My sister and a group of friends suddenly ran into the bathroom and came back with piles of wet paper towels. I asked what was going on. They tried to downplay it, but I pressed. Finally, they told me. The boyfriend had locked my best friend in the car because she got too drunk, and she had crapped all over herself, her clothes, and the inside of the car. She was out in the parking lot, raving like a lunatic. Multiple people tried to get them to leave. Eventually, the boyfriend walked off into the night. Finally, it was time for my husband and me to leave. Everyone gathered outside, including his family who had flown in from across the country. But what did we walk out to? My best friend, naked from the waist down, wearing only a large open jacket, squatting and peeing on the tire of the car next to ours. Oh, and the owner of that car? A cop. The local police department was having their Christmas party at the same venue. My husband grabbed me, rushed me to the car, and we drove off. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to find a shovel and dig a hole for two bodies. And no, that wasn't the end. While I was sitting in our hotel room staring out at the concrete, I saw them, her and the boyfriend. He ran in, got a room, came back with a sheet, wrapped her up, and they started fighting. Screaming, punching, and eventually, she lost the sheet, completely naked in the hotel parking lot. Staff came out and kicked them out. I prayed it was finally over. But then my phone blew up. Friends from all over town were messaging me, asking where she was. Apparently, she left the boyfriend at a corner store and drove off. Minutes later, I got a call from my sister, who was watching our two small kids. My best friend had shown up at my house, still smelling awful. My sister showered her, got her into clean clothes, and put her to bed. Then her phone started ringing. It was the boyfriend, threatening to come over and kill everyone in the house for not letting him in. Turns out, she called him and told him where she was. The cops came. He got arrested. She passed out. 20 years of a normal, loving friendship, gone. Just like that. Down the drain. Story 5. My own wedding. We've been married 3 years now. I'll always love my wife, but let me give you some background. We made the mistake of housing my bride's family for the week leading up to the wedding. Terrible idea. We were already stressed, and having them around only made it worse. Her mom, my future MIL, and sister, SGL, spent the entire time complaining about everything while putting in zero effort toward the things they had promised to help with. Weeks before the wedding, my MIL convinced my wife to cancel our caterer, whom we had already booked and paid a non-refundable deposit for, in favor of a DIY buffet with finger foods and build-your-own sandwich stations. I reluctantly agreed because MIL promised that the bride's family would help serve and restock the food so that we could enjoy the reception without worry. Fast forward to the big day. It was a Saturday afternoon in August. The ceremony was short and sweet, and my wife looked like an absolute 11. Afterward, we took our photos while the 90 or so guests headed to the reception. By the time we got there, people were already eating and drinking. Understandable, since photos take time. About an hour in, I noticed a keg was leaking and asked several people, mostly in-laws and extended family, to keep an eye on it so no one would trip. I also saw the food trays were getting low. I went into the kitchen and found my aunt, who is also my mom's twin, working hard to keep everything stocked. The trays had been prepped the day before by my sisters and aunt so restocking would be smooth, but now she was handling it alone. I offered to help, but she insisted I go enjoy my wedding. As I was walking over to ask my in-laws for help, since that was literally the deal, we made someone from their side, a friend of a friend we hadn't even invited, walked into the kitchen, demanded my aunt clean up the leaky keg, and told her it was her job. That's when I saw my aunt make a beeline for my mom. Minutes later, I heard my mom yelling my MIL's name over the DJ, who was terrible, by the way, along with every insult in the book. All hell broke loose. Before I knew it, both families were outside trying to separate the mothers, which only ended when my wife punched her own mother in the face, like half a dozen times. The rest is a blur. We kicked out my SIL, who went full banshee and made everything worse. One of my sisters, my parents, my grandfather, and about 2/3 of the guests ended up leaving early. Our photographers left too, since our time was up, and we were left with almost no photos of the reception. In the end, we had a ton of leftover food and 2 half kegs barely touched. Awesome. To this day, not one person from my wife's side of the family, except for her brother, who's actually cool, has apologized. In fact, the only thing we've heard since is that they think someone owes them an apology, though no one can tell us who or why. The kicker? My wife is an ordained minister who can legally marry people in our state. Every wedding we attend now, we joke with the couple that our reception is the universal standard for how low the bar for a disaster can go. But still, 3 years later, she's my number one. We have 2 daughters who are just like their mom, and I'm excited to live every day with them. Plus, I get to enjoy long, peaceful stretches without seeing any of the in-laws, since they all live several hundred, if not thousands, of miles away. Story 6. My father slapped my brother and kicked him and his wife out of his own wedding. The guests didn't even notice the bride and groom were gone and just kept celebrating. Update 1. Okay, I didn't think people would want to hear more about this, but I'd love to share. I tend to either overshare or say nothing, so buckle up. First of all, yes, I meant the wedding reception, but English isn't my first language, so I didn't even know there was a separate word for that. To be honest, a lot of tension had been building during the wedding planning, and it all exploded on the actual day. Some background. Both of my parents are narcissistic and abusive. My siblings, brother, sister, and I, F21, were born and raised in a high-control religious cult, Jehovah's Witnesses. If you're a JW, you can only have sex if you're married, and you can only marry once. Divorce is a huge no-no. So my brother and my sister-in-law, SGL, were both around 21, had been dating for over 5 years, and were horny and ready to finally be together. So they got married. Duh. Also worth noting, we're from the former Yugoslavia, and cultural traditions are a big part of weddings. My parents hated my SDL because that's what they do. She's smart, successful, stunning, and refused to let them manipulate her. So of course she became enemy number 1. My parents are incapable of expressing any emotion that isn't negative. My brother and SIL got married in 2011. In our culture, it's traditional for the groom's parents to pay for the wedding. My parents, who had money but were extremely cheap, used finances as a tool for manipulation and control. Their idea of how much a wedding dress should cost was completely outdated. Anytime my SIL wanted something for the wedding, they shot it down. One example, she found a stunning, discounted Swarovski wedding dress for $1,000. My mom said no, so my SGL offered to pay for it herself. Then my mom got offended and called it rude. She insisted they could find something for half the price. Even the cashier, who had a strong personality, was visibly frustrated and told my mom that if she agreed to pay for the dress, she should do it. My mom got even more upset, saying now she looked like the bad guy. That happened with everything. Music, guests, food, you name it. It was clear they were trying to plan the wedding they never had, instead of letting it be my brother's wedding. My brother and SIL lived in our building, in the spare apartment beneath ours, until they could find their own place. My parents would show up unannounced, complain constantly, and insult them about being dirty or needing to clean more. My brother couldn't afford the wedding, but even if he could, my parents wouldn't have let him pay. They constantly reminded them, "We're the ones paying, so don't you dare argue or you'll end up homeless." It was constant manipulation and guilt tripping. We're the victims, and you're ungrateful. Eventually, they started painting my brother as the poor victim being manipulated by this crazy, selfish, arrogant woman, aka my SGL. And to this day, they still believe that, even though she's one of the kindest, smartest people I know. After months of emotional and psychological abuse toward the couple, the wedding reception finally happened, 6 months after the actual wedding. My parents were too lazy and cheap to plan the party on time. I was 16, depressed, and busy surviving my own mess, so I've forgotten 80% of the drama. Just know the tension was unbearable. I call the reception the couple strikes back. Here's what I remember. My brother and SGL were an hour late. She arrived in the Swarovski dress, which she proudly announced she bought herself, just to stick it to my parents. My brother spent most of his time with her side of the family, who were limited in number because my parents restricted how many guests she could bring. Meanwhile, my brother didn't even know half of their guests. Someone in my family wore a traditional bride's headpiece, like they were the bride. The food was fine. There was a chocolate fountain, but the kids took over. I wasn't suicidal enough to fight through them. My grandpa got completely wasted. Someone stole a shoe. My SDL avoided our side of the family the entire night. My mom accidentally wore a necklace identical to the one she knew my SIL would wear. My father had told all the guests to bring money instead of gifts, saying the couple will need it more. What he didn't tell them was that he and my mom had made a deal. They'd keep all the cash gifts as compensation for paying for the wedding, and the couple could keep the physical gifts. Meaning, thanks to my dad, most people brought cash, which my parents pocketed, and my brother and SGL left with almost nothing. Everything felt fake, overdone, and full of microaggressions. My mom yelled at my SIL for not dancing with my grandma. At some point, my father took the couple outside and asked them, "What do you think you're doing?" My brother responded, "Obviously, this isn't my wedding. It's yours. So I'm just trying to enjoy it." That's when my dad slapped him. Then he shoved my SIL. She nearly fell, but her friend caught her. He shouted something like, "You're a disgrace to this family. You're the biggest mistake of my life," and kept yelling as my brother and SIL left. My uncles had to hold him back. I walked into the middle of that mess, completely confused. One of my drunk uncles told me my brother had disrespected my father. Then I watched my father plaster on a fake smile, walk back into the party, and carry on like nothing happened. Music still blasting, just like a good Christian. My family isn't normal. They thrive on drama and abuse. So, I guess it could have been worse. Anyway, I hope this gave enough context to enjoy. And sorry for any typos. I'm on mobile. Update 2. Some of you asked what happened afterward. My brother went no contact with my parents for 4 years after that day. They had already moved out that morning, without telling anyone. Then, last year, he reconnected with them, and everything fell apart. Sadly, my brother had adopted some of our parents' behaviors, which I was too young to recognize back then. He began treating my SIL like garbage. He cheated on her, and told her to just deal with it because he wanted to sleep around, lost his job, refused to find a new one, and lived off her salary for most of their marriage. He manipulated her into feeling guilty for being upset. A few weeks ago, she finally divorced him, after he physically assaulted her over money. Now he's best friends with my parents again. They all share a common enemy, my SIL. During the divorce, my parents were supposed to pay part of the settlement, since my brother is broke and she was the one working, but they only paid her half of what was promised. She was kicked out of their shared home with nothing but $5,000. That's $5,000 for 5 years of marriage, abuse, and manipulation. So she did the only thing she could. She sued them. I know I sound biased, but I honestly admire and care for my SIL. I consider her more of a friend than a relative. She endured so much and never said a bad word about my brother, even when he treated her like trash. I only found out about the abuse recently. She had been too ashamed and manipulated to tell anyone. Now she's doing really well. She's reconnected with old friends, made new ones, started a new life, and is slowly healing from everything she's been through. We talk almost every day. As for me, I left the cult last year. I just moved into my own place last week. I'm in therapy, I have a job, and this past week has been one of the happiest of my life. My little sister, 18, is still living with our parents, though I've told her she's always welcome to move in with me. I even gave her a spare key. I hope my home can be the safe space she needs when she's ready. If I regret one thing, it's that I didn't warn my SIL before she married into this family. I was too young, and even though I sensed something was wrong, I didn't fully understand how toxic it all was. I just wish I could have spared her everything she went through, but I couldn't. Story 7. This very well could be the worst wedding of all time. Now, this story has 2 major plot lines that unfold simultaneously over the course of the night. Keep that in mind. A few years ago, I was invited to a wedding down south. A buddy and I drove down a few days early and met up with a bunch of our old high school friends. We had the time of our lives, drinking, chasing girls, telling stories, and laughing like we hadn't in years. Then came the wedding itself, one of the most beautiful ceremonies I've ever seen. It took place in a botanical garden, in full bloom, during fall in Florida. I'm not exaggerating, it was magical. Everything was absolutely perfect. We headed to the reception venue afterward, and it turned into a night for the record books. Drinks were flowing, everyone was dancing, and chaos, the fun kind, took over. To this day, it was the funniest and most unhinged best man speech I've ever heard. Afterward, we went back to the hotel to keep the party going. Beer pong, cigars, more dancing and laughing. I eventually passed out in some random bed, surrounded by people draped across the room like it was a movie scene. Sounds like an amazing wedding, right? At around 7 a.m., we were all jolted awake by loud, aggressive pounding on the door, the kind of knock you'd expect from a sheriff serving a warrant. 2 bridesmaids stormed in, asking, "Have you seen X?" From now on, we'll call her the missing bridesmaid. We all answered no. They left, clearly panicked. We didn't think much of it at first. After all, the previous night had been full of drunken debauchery. So we started gathering our things, reminiscing about the night, and slowly waking up. But then we realized we couldn't find the bride or the groom. Considering this was basically a destination wedding and most of us were staying in the same area, that felt odd. So we started looking around. That's where storyline 1 kicks in. Turns out the groom's brother-in-law had cheated on his wife, who is, by the way, a classy and beautiful woman, with 2 absolute disasters of human beings. From what I heard, it was a sweaty, shame-filled threesome in a hotel room. When his wife found out, she confronted him, and he slapped her and threw her around the room. Unfortunately for him, the room shared a door with the bridal suite. And here's what you need to know. The groom and his brother are both well over 6 feet 5 inches, muscular, lanky, big-fisted guys. The type where even a joking punch to your arm leaves a bruise for a week. They heard the commotion, came into the room, saw their sister bleeding, and, well, they snapped. They beat the guy nearly to death. From what I was told, it was only 2 or 3 punches, but the brother-in-law wasn't breathing afterward. He turned blue. The groom had to perform CPR just to keep him alive until the ambulance arrived. He ended up in a coma for 4 months. The groom and his brother were arrested on the spot for aggravated assault and thrown in jail with $50,000 bail each. Apparently, things are fine now, and the brother-in-law is more respectful, or so I've heard. Yep, arrested on your wedding night for nearly killing your brother-in-law. But wait, it gets worse. Storyline 2. We were still at a friend's house trying to figure out what happened to the missing bridesmaid. We were drinking, smoking, and just sitting in stunned silence, still not knowing the full picture, when the phone rang. Then came the scream. I swear to God, it was the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. One of the bridesmaids came out crying, sobbing uncontrollably, barely able to breathe. Turns out, the missing bridesmaid's boyfriend had caught her doing cocaine in the bathroom during the reception. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her out of the venue. Nobody saw anything except a few girls who had been in the bathroom with her. He drove her to a nearby beach, where he beat her to death. Then he dumped her body into the ocean. The injuries were so severe that when her body was discovered, the initial assumption was that she'd been struck by a boat propeller. We sat in silence, shocked, crying, mourning, consoling each other. And then it was time to leave. We packed up and started the long drive back north. At one point, we got pulled over by an extremely ambitious Georgia cop, the kind of guy who seemed ready to arrest us just for existing. He separated us, questioned us individually, and asked what we were doing. We each told him the full story, and when we finished, this man, jaw completely dropped, just stared at us for a moment before saying, "Drive safe, boys." Story 8. Apologies in advance for any formatting issues. First time posting from mobile. When I was in my early 20s, I picked up a part-time job as a weekend doorman. The building was about 18 stories tall. The first 7 floors were used for wedding receptions, and everything above that was rented out as apartments. Each of the reception floors had its own unique theme. One had stained glass windows, another was all wood paneling, and so on. Not that any of that really matters, but hey, it helps paint the picture. Anyway, it was a typical Saturday night wedding reception, and things were winding down. I'd done my doorman duties. "May I take your hat, sir? May I take your hat?" And was now just hanging out with the security guard as people started filing out to their cars. By around 12:30 a.m., the place was mostly empty, except for one woman who couldn't find her husband anywhere. No big deal. The building was old and had a lot of character, And when people got drunk, it wasn't unusual for them to go wandering floor to floor, checking out the different themed rooms. So we sent some of the bartenders to look around, had security check the basement, and figured we'd find him in no time. 30 minutes go by. Nothing. The wife was starting to get really upset now, and our security guard was doing his best to calm her down. Finally, around 1 a.m., the guard comes back, with the missing husband and a completely random old man. Random old man. This is good. We can all go back to my hotel and talk this through. Wife starts crying. Husband, no, it was a mistake. I need to go home with my wife. Slap. Wife smacks him, still crying. Random old man. She can come too. We'll work this all out. At this point, the security guard steps in and tells them they can work it out in the parking lot and promptly escorts them out. Then he turns to us and tells us what really happened. Apparently, he had found the two men mid-activity in the bridal suite. The husband, drunk out of his mind, had been caught, pants down, going to town on the old guy's backside. In the bridal suite. I was with the bartenders when he told us this, and obviously, we had to go check it out for ourselves. So we went up there, giggling like idiots. The moment we stepped into the room, we were hit with a wall of sweat, sex, and shame. The stench of sweat, ass, and semen was overwhelming. We all turned and ran back out immediately. It became way too real. I wish I had a satisfying ending to this story or knew what happened afterward, but that was it. We finished cleaning up, went home, and went to bed. Just another night as a doorman. Story 9. I actually have 2 weddings tied for the worst thing to happen at a wedding, but for very different reasons. The first one happened to one of my best friends back in college. His older brother was getting married and, for reasons beyond his comprehension, asked my friend to be his best man, which was weird because, according to him, they weren't even that close. To make things stranger, the brother also asked their older sister to be a bridesmaid, then disinvited her months later over super petty reasons. My buddy told his brother to re-invite her or he'd drop out of the wedding too. The response? Some vague BS about going in a different direction, blah blah blah. So my friend invited me to the wedding specifically for moral support and for the laughs. Oh my god, what a disaster. The groom's parents were barely involved in anything. From what I was told, the rehearsal dinner was basically a love fest for the bride's family, and the groom's parents barely got a thank you. Meanwhile, the gossip coming out of the bride's dressing room sounded like borderline hate speech toward her future in-laws. The ceremony itself was just awkward as hell. But then came the reception. They had planned an outdoor reception in January. Now sure, Southern California isn't known for heavy rain. But let's be real. January is still cold and wet, and rain does happen. The ceremony itself got lucky. It was sunny, but the 4-hour gap between wedding and reception gave a storm front plenty of time to roll in. The whole thing had to be frantically relocated to the garage area of the venue, and it might have been salvageable, if not for 4 key details. 1. The groom's grandma and extended family were seated in the very back, directly underneath a tent with a leaking roof. Meanwhile, the bride's grandparents were seated at table number 2, right up front. 2. There was no dancing, aside from the couple's first dance. The bride's father had passed away from cancer years ago, though my friend whispered it was actually some kind of cover-up. Apparently, he didn't exactly die a free man. So, no father-daughter dance, which is understandable. But there was also no mother-son dance. In fact, there was no other dancing at all, even though they had a DJ, who turned out to just be one of the groom's friends, playing cheesy, church-approved music. 3. The couple spent the entire night trying to convince everyone how in love they were. They had each recorded videos for the other, complete with overly dramatic love declarations. The kind of thing that makes you wonder if they're trying to prove something, to themselves or everyone else. Each video was nearly 5 minutes long, and they said things like, "You make me so happy," about 150 times. It felt less like a romantic moment and more like watching 2 high schoolers reading from a script. 4. When the groom's grandma left, after 45 minutes of sitting in the cold rain, no one batted an eye. Neither the bride nor the groom went to check on her. And she looked frail. Like old lady in a sweater who should be in bed frail. She just left alone. The whole event felt like one giant, self-centered, performative mess. And to top it all off, apparently there was serious family drama happening in the background. Rumor has it the groom's dad, who's a real estate broker, was accused of trying to pressure the bride's mom to sell her house to help pay for the wedding. And when family members started getting kicked out of the wedding party, the groom's dad didn't want to pay anymore. If those accusations had turned into a formal complaint, he could have lost his license and ended up out of a job. So yeah, from a burn every family bridge possible standpoint, that one takes the cake. Story 10. Someone I know has a really bad relationship with his father due to years and years of selfish, destructive behavior. The father had stayed behind in their home country to take care of the business, while the mother moved to the US, working hard and sending money back to support it. In reality, the father was using that money to live like a king, showing off around town, spending recklessly, impregnating multiple women, paying them off, and ultimately running the family business into the ground. Eventually, the parents divorced, but the father continued to cause problems from across the world. He demanded half of a house that the mother had paid for entirely on her own, and he even sold off inherited land that had belonged to her and was awarded to her after the divorce. Fast forward to the wedding. Guests were flying in from all over the place, including city leaders from their hometown. The father was, understandably, not invited. But since the rest of the town was attending, word got around, and of course the father decided that it didn't matter whether he was invited or not. He showed up at the rehearsal dinner. My friend was livid, but his mother begged him to let it go. She preached forgiveness, said it was a big day, and convinced him to allow his father to attend the wedding. He reluctantly agreed, for her sake, but made it crystal clear that his father was not to be involved in the ceremony in any way. He was just a guest, nothing more. The father promised, swore up and down, that he'd behave. The day of the wedding arrived. The ceremony began, and the father didn't even show up. The 2 front row seats reserved for the parents of the groom were left completely empty. Later, at the chateau where the reception was held, the father was already there, waiting. In a sparkling gold tuxedo. I'm talking full Bond villain, gold suit, gold bow tie, gold shoes. And where was he sitting? In his ex-wife's reserved seat, right next to the bride and groom's table. When confronted, the father acted shocked and said the seating chart had listed Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Since the mother had never changed her last name, he claimed he thought it meant him and his new wife. So they just took the seats of honor, displacing the groom's mother entirely. When he was asked to move, he refused. He raised his voice and shouted that he was the father of the groom, and he wasn't about to be humiliated in front of the entire town like some bum. My friend lost it. He charged his father, grabbed him, and had to be physically pulled back by his groomsmen. The father tore away, sat back down, and gripped the table like he was hanging off the deck of the Titanic. He yelled that he was going to call the police because his son had assaulted him and ripped his tuxedo. The bride was crying. The groomsmen were trying to hold back the groom, who looked ready to commit murder. It was absolute chaos. Then, something clicked. The groom just stopped. He adjusted his tuxedo, walked over, hugged and kissed his wife, and said calmly, "I'm not going to let this person ruin anything." Then he turned to his father and said, "You can sit in that chair for the rest of your life for all I care." Then, like a boss, he had us move the entire bride and groom's table, the wedding cake, and the projector screen to the opposite side of the reception hall. It completely repositioned the layout and left his father sitting awkwardly in the back of the room, facing away from everything. Thankfully, all of this happened during the cocktail hour, before most of the guests had arrived. Only the wedding party and a few of us ushers saw any of it. We cleaned up the aftermath, rearranged the space, and by the time the guests showed up, it looked like nothing had ever happened. The rest of the night? Perfect. Story 11. The couple was pretty poor. I'll just start with that. When we arrived and checked into our hotel, we ended up getting locked inside our room because someone had destroyed the doorknob from the inside. The phone didn't work either. We could only call room to room. Since we had no idea where anyone else was staying yet, we just started dialing random rooms until we finally reached someone who could tell the front desk we were trapped. 2 of the bridesmaids couldn't get off work because the entire wedding party worked at the same Kmart, and they didn't have enough people to cover the shift. So 2 guests filled in as last-minute bridesmaids. One of the groomsmen got arrested for cocaine possession right before the wedding, so the husband of one of the guests, who was also a bridesmaid, stepped in to take his place in the lineup. Somehow, he even fit perfectly into the other guy's rented tux. They left the unity candle in the car, and it melted. So the minister's wife had to make a last-minute run to the nearest craft store to buy a new one. The groom really wanted a limo, so they spent their DJ money on renting one. And the limo caught fire in the parking lot of the reception. Because they had blown the DJ budget, they asked me to be the DJ. At the time, I was mostly a metalhead, and all of their CDs were either country or rap, most of which had been trashed at a party the night before. Everything skipped or wouldn't play at all. We ended up alternating between a LeAnn Rimes album and the Dr. Dolittle, Eddie Murphy version soundtrack. One of the out-of-town guests brought their dog, who ended up being killed by a large snake in a water-filled trench that ran behind the bride's parents' house. Their wedding invitations were printed at home by a friend as a gift to the couple on a color.matrix printer. Unfortunately, the groom's last name was spelled wrong, so every single monogrammed gift they received had the wrong name. Our family gave them $150 to spend on food so the guests would have something to eat. The only thing they provided was a few cases of 7-Up, purchased using the mother of the bride's refrigerator rent money. They came back with 2 trays of pre-cooked chicken wings and a tray of baked beans. The bride then took the rest of the money and spent it on beautiful new acrylic nails. When the food was brought out, the groom's entire side of the family bum-rushed the table. By the time they were done, no one from the bride's side, the side that actually paid for the food and had traveled over 1,000 miles, got anything. We ended up leaving and going to Sizzler, got terrible service, tried Long John Silver's, got gross food, and eventually ended the night at McDonald's. A few months later, the groom was arrested for drug trafficking, apparently connected to the groomsman who'd been busted for possession, and ended up spending several years in prison. While he was locked up, the bride found out he had 7 kids from previous relationships, none of which she had known about before the wedding. Not that it really changes anything, but she had 4 kids from 4 different fathers, none with the groom. As far as I know, all 4 of her kids were taken away for a while. She and her sister were homeless for a bit. Eventually, they all moved in together and are now raising the kids. I believe the groom is out of prison now, but they're not living together. No divorce, just living separately with 0 contact. Story 12. At my wedding. The night before, my best man, also my best friend, arrived from Boston just in time for the rehearsal. At the rehearsal dinner, he started complaining that he felt stiff and hot. We just assumed it was from the travel. He spent the night in the hotel suite with me, and it was clear something was off. He was having cold sweats and basically didn't sleep at all. He looked rough, but in the morning, he assured me he'd be fine. We get to the ceremony, and you can already tell he looks bloated. But again, he keeps insisting he feels better. Halfway through the ceremony, it's a Catholic wedding, so we're kneeling at the altar. He leans over and whispers, "I don't think I'm going to make it." My eyes go wide. My wife leans in and asks what he said, and I reply, "I think we're about to lose him." And then he starts swaying. Before he completely drops, I grab him under the arm to hold him up. Another groomsman jumps in and takes his other side, and then my sister takes over the side I was holding. Somehow, he pulls it together just in time to hand me the rings. He pushes through the rest of the ceremony and even gets through the photos like a champ. By the time we get to the reception, he's clearly fading again, but he's determined. When it comes time for speeches, he stands up, looks pale as hell, and absolutely nails it. Best man speech I've ever heard. Hands down. By the end of it, I had underoos on my head and a stuffed doll his grandmother sewed for him as a child, named after me, sitting in my lap. People were laughing so hard they were crying. My wife was sitting there wondering what on earth she'd just married into. It was glorious. He sits down, basking in the laughter, and then just fades away again. We ended up sending him straight to the ER. Turns out, he had swine flu. He was in the hospital for the next 2 weeks, which happened to be our entire honeymoon, while doctors ran spinal taps and test after test before finally diagnosing it. Swine flu had just started spreading at that time, so nobody knew what they were dealing with at first. Honestly, it was both the craziest and the best thing that happened at our wedding, aside from, actually marrying my wife. Story 13. This will probably get buried, but I have the winner. At my eldest brother's wedding, my mother decided that, since she wasn't the one paying for the alcohol, she was going to get her money's worth. She downed about 6 very generous glasses of wine during the wedding supper, then hit up the open bar shortly afterward. At some point, she decided it was a great idea to dance with the still happily married father of the bride. But not just dance. She started groping him and grinding on him to sexy songs like Kodachrome by Simon and Garfunkel, Dancing Queen, and a selection of other ABBA classics. It got really uncomfortable. I had to step in and cut in for a dance, just to get her away from him. I leaned in and told her, under no circumstances was she to go near that man again. She was making a fool of herself. She left the dance floor, much to everyone's relief. About an hour later, I found her at the open bar, locked in a tequila shooting contest with some random guy. She slurred that she'd only had 9 shots, but honestly, I have no idea if that was true, and I doubt she remembers. From that point on, she wandered around the reception, slurrily insulting people. At one point, she looked me dead in the eyes and asked, "Are you embarrassed by me?" Right before turning to my dad, who, by the way, has been divorced from her for over 25 years, and shouting, "Hey Richard, wanna fuck?" He stood up and silently slinked away from the table without a word. But it didn't end there. She started going around the room, loudly claiming that the father of the bride had sexually assaulted her on the dance floor, and that she was going to get him for what he did. This was, of course, complete nonsense, as 100+ people had seen her throw herself at him all night. Shortly after making that claim, she stumbled into the bathroom, pulled down her underwear, sat on the toilet, puked all over the front of her dress, and passed out cold on the floor of the bathroom stall, underwear still around her ankles, covered in vomit. We ended up cutting a hole in a garbage bag to put her head through, so we could slip it over her like a makeshift dress and get her into a car, without ruining the seats. To this day, despite over 100 witnesses to the contrary, she still insists that the father of the bride sexually assaulted her, and she continues to send him nasty messages on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, my mother. Story 14. My wife has a cousin who's just a rich asshole. There's no nicer way to put it. She always tells me he was a good guy when they were kids, but he started a business in some kind of tech field. What he does has never really made sense to me, and now he can't seem to talk about anything other than how much money he has. I avoid the guy, mostly because it's just fucking embarrassing to be around him. His efforts to impress everyone are disturbingly pathetic. His daughter was getting married. He had just finished a huge mansion overlooking a bend in a river in eastern North Carolina. If you're not familiar with Eastern NC, let's just describe it as a hot, flat, foul-smelling swamp, punctuated by exquisite racism and soybean fields that used to grow tobacco. The rivers there are basically putrid, muddy trenches. Why anyone would want to live near one I have no idea, but he probably thought it would impress somebody. Naturally, the asshole saw the entire wedding as his chance to show off his new house. Whatever was going on with his daughter was strictly a sideshow to the main event. So the wedding came, and they had it in the living room or something. It was overdone, but fine. For the reception, we all went outside to these tents in the back on a flat piece of ground overlooking the river. The reception was fine too, at first. Then they brought out the food. Flies. Black flies. Nasty little black flies. At the first smell of food, they rose from the river in a wave. A rippling wall of black. I mean, a plague of flies of biblical proportions. I've never seen anything like it. Within 30 seconds, every bit of food and every guest at the reception was covered in a solid scuttling layer of black. Women started screaming. People started swatting, then running. Some ran for their cars, some ran for the house, some just ran. But my favorite image of the whole day was watching the asshole standing there talking to the bride and groom, trying desperately to act as if nothing was happening to mar his perfect event. There were flies on her face, but she didn't move. She just kept smiling. He kept smiling. The groom knew where his paychecks were going to be coming from, so by God, he kept smiling too. Then, in one of the most admirable and perverse acts of self-deception I've ever seen, the asshole raised a cracker to his mouth, completely and utterly covered with flies, and the bastard took a big fucking bite of it. I don't think I've ever laughed that hard in my life. The best part of the whole story is that I used to have to try really hard to avoid the guy, but at the next family get-together, I called him the Lord of the Flies, and now he avoids me too. Story 15. The worst thing I've seen at a wedding happened just 2 days ago. We attended the wedding of some old friends, didn't know anyone among the 200 or so guests, and it was the first wedding we brought our 3-year-old son to. Long story short, everyone was standing outside having a drink and getting photographed around the pool. It was pretty cold. Kids were playing, and my wife and I joked that putting an orange sweater on our son was a great idea, since it made him super easy to spot instantly. Then, of course, we see an orange blur fall into the water at the other end of the pool. It's only been 2 days, but after that, every memory feels blurry. I started running like a madman, never taking my eyes off him. I saw a stranger in a tux jump into the water. I got there after what felt like a whole minute, probably more like 4 seconds. He was handing me my kid. I pulled him out of the water and asked if he was all right. At that moment, I was dumbfounded to realize someone else was in the water. In the panic, my 7-month pregnant wife, in her beautiful evening dress, had run straight toward the pool and jumped in for nothing. So there I was. On my right, my soaked, sobbing toddler shivering in the cold, and on my left, my wife struggling to swim out of the pool in high heels. There were people all around, total chaos. She got out of the water in tears, completely in shock. Since I had run around the pool from the right side, and she had run from the left, she thought I hadn't seen our boy fall in, so her motherly instincts pushed her to jump. In the end, it turned out okay. Everyone was very supportive, the bridesmaids offered them a shower, and the guy in the tux happened to be staying in the same hotel as us just 5 minutes away. Within half an hour, everyone was in dry clothes and having a well-deserved drink, except my wife, of course, because of the pregnancy. As a bonus, it was a fantastic icebreaker for the rest of the night, and we ended up having a really good time. I know this isn't the kind of bad wedding story you might expect, but holy shit, that was terrifying, and by far the worst thing I've ever seen happen at a wedding. Story 16. Catholic Church. The priest is late for the first wedding of the morning, while 2 other couples wait their turn outside, with families and friends gathered on opposite ends of the church porch, eyeing each other. The first wedding comes out with their families and friends. Rice gets tossed, the usual. Then it starts raining. The late priest suddenly has a brilliant idea. He calls both waiting couples and their entourages inside from the rain, and then, surprise, tells them they're all getting married together. Right now, 2 couples who don't know each other at all, never met. Not a single member of either party had ever crossed paths with anyone from the other group. But hey, just get married together, people, it'll save time. So both families and friends from the wedding I was attending were stuck on the left side of the aisle, while the families and friends of the other couple sat on the right. Everyone glared at the priest, who couldn't have cared less, and he went right on with it. He topped it off with a ridiculous little speech full of awful puns, about church and a brothel, no less. His pun in French was, "Elle église n'est pas une maison où elle en passe. Elle église n'est pas une maison de passe." Then he asked, in a round, if fiancé 1 and fiancé 1 plus fiancé 2 and fiancé 2 wanted to get married. The 4 of them shyly muttered, yes, and that was it. Several mothers and aunts from both sides tried to politely tell the priest he had been rude, that you don't talk about brothels at the altar, and that he had basically spoiled the weddings. But it was useless. He was very pleased with himself, probably because, in his mind, he was no longer late. The sister of the bride I knew was about to get married herself soon. She was Catholic, her fiancé was Protestant, and they both attended this disaster. That's when they decided their own wedding would be at the Protestant temple, not the Catholic church, because enough was enough with this mad priest and his puns. Story 17. I wasn't attending the wedding, didn't know the family, and have no clue what the bride's literal reaction was, but it all played out as a vivid, Technicolor public spectacle, so it was still a beautiful shit show. Let me set the stage. A decent hotel, not amazing, but perfectly fine, late May. The hotel had 2 big events going on at once. A convention that had multiple conference rooms booked and 2 to 3 entire floors occupied, and a decently sized wedding. The elevators and lobby were shared between the 2 groups, so there was constant overlap. And the convention? BDSM, kink-themed. Everyone was dressed within legal limits, but no one was in streetwear. Picture grandma riding the elevator with a woman in a leather corset holding a 60-year-old man on a leash, dressed in a frilly pinafore. Yeah, things got real for the wedding guests. Now, you'd think that would be bad enough. But no. Enter pink tie, stage left. A frat bro douche canoe who happened to be a groomsman. He spent the entire weekend drunk and, in his sloppy delirium, decided he was suddenly a diehard kinkster who just had to attend this naked chick event to get himself some hot action. Unfortunately for him, the convention didn't sell tickets at the door. Unfortunately for everyone else, he was in the actual wedding party. His solution? Sneak away from his wedding responsibilities and repeatedly try to sneak into the convention. By the end of the weekend, the convention security team was calling over the radios things like code pink tie, third floor elevators, incoming for front desk, and he's pissy. Hotel management got involved, trying to keep him corralled with the wedding party. The whole mess ended with him being forcibly removed from the property by law enforcement because he escalated to getting physical, and our security doesn't handle that without backup. I can't imagine how the bride or pink tie's family reacted to all this, but I'm pretty sure it wrecked that wedding. I know for sure it wrecked my chill while working the convention. Story 18. My cousin got married a couple of years back, and I hadn't met some of her extended family before. After the ceremony, we started socializing a bit, and I noticed my stepdad was clearly upset about something happening at another table. He walked off, and just then the bride and groom came over to say hello. My cousin sighed, pointed across the room, and said, "You see them over there? That's my mom's cousin. That's her husband, their kids, and their girlfriend." What? I looked over and realized most people were avoiding that table. The parents were all over this third person, like openly affectionate, in front of their own kids, who looked visibly uncomfortable. Normally I wouldn't care, but my cousin had made it very clear she didn't want the girlfriend attending her wedding. First, because she didn't know her, and second, because of how wildly inappropriate they acted. And to top it all off, I later learned they had recently lost their youngest child to SIDS, and it was their other two children who discovered her dead because both parents had been high on drugs. Somewhere in their messed up logic, they decided to bring a girlfriend into the mix as a way to cope with the loss, rather than being there for their kids. You could just tell that household was 50 shades of fucked up, and I couldn't help but feel awful for those children. Story 19. Sister 1 is a vegetarian, has been since she was 12. Our dad is a bit shy and introverted, but he gave a perfect speech at her wedding. People were coming up to congratulate him on what a great job he did, and I guess the best man felt jealous he wasn't getting the same recognition. So, right in the middle of the main course, he grabbed the microphone, stood up, and said, "Sorry to interrupt, everyone, just one more quick thing I'd like to add. As we all know, bride is a vegetarian, but as I told groom earlier, I'm sure he'll have no trouble getting some meat past her lips tonight." I looked at my sister, and she literally did that cartoon gulp thing and just stared at him. Nobody laughed. Nobody reacted. The entire room went dead silent, not quite knowing what to do. The best man sat back down, everyone awkwardly resumed eating, and then his wife marched over, dragged him outside, and made him apologize when he came back in. Sister 2 got let go from her job a few weeks before her wedding. They tried to cut costs wherever they could, so I offered to make and edit a playlist for the night so they wouldn't have to hire a DJ. I was a broke student, so it was my gift instead of buying something. By midnight, everyone was on the dance floor having a great time, when suddenly the music stopped. We heard the jack being pulled out of the iPod. I went over and found some dude plugging in his own. I asked what he was doing, and he said, "This music is shite. I'm gonna put something good on." I laughed and told him I agreed it was cheesy, but it was the bride and groom's day and they had chosen the music, so we should just let it play. He called me a music Nazi and told me to fuck off. I told him I was the bride's sister and was just making sure things ran smoothly. He eventually gave up and left, but the dance floor had cleared out by then. Later, I was outside hanging out with my sister's friends when the guy came out, loudly asked who I was, and when they told him I was the bride's sister, he shouted, "I don't care who she is, she's a fucking cunt." Not long after, my sister came by and asked how I was doing. I told her what happened. Apparently, the guy was a friend of the best man, invited only to the afters, and had a reputation. She asked what he did, and I just said, "He called me a cunt." Without missing a beat, she marched over to him, whipped out her phone, and said, "Hey buddy." Yes, that's his real name. I've got the number for the local taxi company right here. It's time for you to leave. My sister is a boss. Story 20. Not the worst thing ever, but the maid of honor's speech at my wedding, my wife's sister, was absolute hell. This was hands down the most cringeworthy speech I've ever heard. Right before her, my best man had given a great, heartfelt speech that lasted about 5 minutes. First thing out of her mouth was, "Well, I'm not going to get all fake and sappy like that last speech." Nobody laughed. My best man and I just looked at each other like, WTF? She had 2 pages of typed out words in her hand, shaking, and still managed to ramble for 20 minutes. 20. You could tell she had never practiced it once. She lost her place multiple times, started crying a few times, and when her family tried to encourage her by telling her she was doing great, she loudly told them to shut up. She called herself a spicy meatball at least 10 different times. She even mentioned how she almost slept with me and that my wife was lucky she didn't, or else we wouldn't be together. She went on about a bunch of negative experiences she'd had with my wife, and the only remotely nice thing she said was, "But you're my sister, and I love you," which of course made her cry again. God, I just wanted it to end. That 20 minutes felt like a fucking eternity. Story 21. My dad's side of the family is eccentric, to put it kindly, and family gatherings usually range from awkward to full-on disasters. Weddings are no exception. My cousin Ed, one of the few normal, well-adjusted relatives on that side, married his longtime girlfriend a couple of years ago. The whole family was invited, except our cousin Joey. Joey isn't exactly what you'd call mentally stable. He had recently been arrested multiple times for breaking and entering. Neighbors would find him wandering inside their houses in the middle of the night, eating food out of their fridges or just sitting on their furniture. Each time, Joey's dad, a fairly high-level government official, managed to get the charges dropped. Understandably, the bride and groom didn't want Joey at the wedding, fearing he'd cause a scene. But Joey's parents begged and guilt-tripped them, insisting it was unfair to exclude him and swearing his medication had fixed his behavior. Eventually, Ed caved, and Joey was invited. Not even 30 minutes into the reception, Joey picked a fight with the bride's entire family, people he had never even met, and shoved her father into the dessert table. He was immediately told to leave, and his parents took him out without much argument. Less than an hour later, though, they returned, without Joey. We assumed they'd dropped him at the hotel. Nope, they had just told him to wait in the car. Of course, Joey didn't listen. He snuck back into the reception and smashed a groomsman with a beer bottle. When another groomsman tried to restrain him, Joey bit him, hard enough to draw blood. At that point, the cops were called, but Joey's parents dragged him out for good before the police arrived. The groomsman who got hit with the bottle needed a few stitches, but after that, the rest of the wedding actually went pretty smoothly. Story 22. I was a groomsman in my friend's wedding. He's a Reformed Jew. Most weddings I've been to are Jewish, mostly conservative, with a couple Orthodox. The ceremonies can vary in length depending on family customs, but one thing is always the same. At the end, the groom steps on the glass wrapped in cloth, and that's everyone's cue to celebrate. At this particular wedding, though, the rabbi was not on his game. In the middle of the ceremony, he realized he didn't have his bag with some of the things he needed. He asked the best man to grab his black bag by the fireplace. The best man came back with my overnight bag instead and handed it to the rabbi. I was like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. I didn't have anything too incriminating in there, except maybe a Ziploc bag of condoms. The rabbi immediately knew it wasn't his bag. Mortified, I sprinted under the chuppah, snatched my bag, ran back to the fireplace, and found another black bag. I opened it to make sure it was really his. I saw the rolled napkin that should contain the glass for the groom to step on, so I figured it was right, though I thought, shouldn't there be an actual wine glass or something in here? Maybe he has it with him. I sprinted back, casually handed it to the rabbi, and returned to my groomsman's spot. Finally, the big moment came for my friend to break the glass and make it official. He lifted his foot over the napkin, and I thought, that looks kind of thin. Sure enough, he stomped down, and nothing. No sound. The rabbi had forgotten to put a glass inside. To anyone who isn't Jewish, that might not seem like a huge deal, but this is the single most recognizable tradition across Jewish weddings. When it didn't happen, my stomach dropped. I swear, I nearly had a heart attack. Story 23. Probably way too late for this to get noticed, but worth putting up anyway. I went to my cousin's wedding about 20 years ago. We'd been really close to that side of the family when I was a kid, but drifted apart over the years. I probably hadn't seen my cousin in about 15 years. Still, it was family, so my mom and I went. Now, my cousin was a bouncer from a very rough part of London, Brixton, where he'd lived all his life. Before the wedding, we met up in a local pub near the registry office. His mates were there. and it was pretty clear he was mixing with people who seemed like characters from a low-budget gangster film. Kind of unsettling. My cousin showed up on crutches, his knee strapped up, because he'd busted it in a fight the night before at his stag party. He was full of painkillers, definitely needed to have it properly looked at. But hey, wedding. He came over to me with a VHS camera and told me I'd be filming the ceremony. I declined. He told me again, no, I would be filming. So I did, even though I had no idea how to properly work the cheap video camera. After the wedding, in the garden of the registry office, I was filming the photos, bride and family, all the family, bride and groom with kids, etc. I was trying to hang back as far as I could, when my mom walked over from the photo group and, right next to the camera microphone, said, "Isn't the bride fucking ugly?" Shut up, Mom. Why? She's really fucking ugly. Meanwhile, I'm holding the camera as far away from her as I can, panicking because I didn't know how to quickly turn it off. Later, I handed the camera back to him and bailed. Haven't seen him since that day. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.